Let's be honest, you expected a Burnout review, but instead we've got a game about trains. And it's called Railway Empire. I'll be honest, this is one of the best strategy games I've played on the Nintendo Switch, and I've been absolutely addicted to it. It looks like a complete dog's dinner at times, but what it lacks in visual polish, it makes up for in incredibly addictive gameplay that has a surprising and albeit impressive amount of depth. If you were a fan of games like Theme Park or Roller Coaster Tycoon back in the day, there's certainly something that's going to appeal to you with this one. Has Calypso Media done enough to make it work on the Switch, or is this one going to run out of steam? Let's find out. Now strangely, in terms of the story, the game actually presents itself really well. There's a number of historically accurate figures who narrate the experience and talk you through the early years of the railway systems in several locations. It's really impressive how they do this to make what would otherwise be a really technical and potentially dull tutorial section into something far more interesting. And there really is no way around it. You will need to do at least some of the tutorials in the game because it's a multifaceted experience that just has a lot of depth to it, much like those old classics I mentioned at the start. Now, the tutorial sees you beginning to lay some of the earliest tracks across America, and I'm not gonna lie, my geography is horrible, but I was still able to follow along. There are a number of different scenarios which gradually unlock as you work your way through them, and each has its own story of sorts, again based on historically accurate events. It was really nice to see some of the latter stages featuring my very own England and seeing how the railway came across, but also how many of the trains would be imported from other countries. And this touch of realism and a little drop of history certainly makes the experience easier to get into for new players. When you begin the game, you're given a tutorial which will guide you through initially making a train station near one of the major cities and then connecting some of the local industries to it. And each town's going to have its own unique desires and needs, but also industry that it produces. You can go into these graphs and work out exactly what you need to deliver to this place, and likewise what you can potentially produce here at a lower cost than elsewhere. You'll then be linking these up with the other areas in the hope of building lucrative trade routes. Now along your track you're going to want to think about things like supply towers to keep your trains tickety-boo, because without these they'll be breaking down every 5 minutes. Now there are a number of objectives for you to complete, so it's not completely hands off. These are usually grouped by year, so you know what the next thing to aim for is, and if you miss one of these you will fail the criteria and you'll have to restart or reload, but thankfully you can save at any point throughout the game. There is a pause mechanic here which will stop time when you're trying to build or change items, and the planning and laying of your track is a surprisingly in-depth but simplistic affair. It will show you the cost of demolishing the terrain, and you'll have to be careful not to go through or over hilly terrain, as this will cost you a great deal more cash. But this all works automatically. However, if you wish to take over and manually create your tracks in terms of the height or creating tunnels or bridges, then you can do that, but it's not necessary. Once you've connected a few towns, cities and industries, you want to hire and create a few new trains. Just as with every aspect of the game, there's a bit of an anno element to it, whereby you unlock new technologies based on the year that you're in, but also the amount of experience points that you've unlocked. This is a really nice touch. It gives it a bit of an RPG element, with different trains having improved statistics, but it's not just about speed, as the terrain has different elevations, and some are able to pull things uphill, while others are just really quick but quite weak. If you get bored, you can hop onto the trains, but I'm not gonna lie, the visuals, yeah. Just have a look at this. Another really cool feature of the game is that later on in the campaign, you'll have competitors to either play with or against. Not only were these voice acted, but they will tend to do things slightly underhand from time to time, like sending a saboteur to take out one of your stations. And in turn, you can respond in kind, or you can go for a more diplomatic approach. But while these rivalries will be ongoing, you can also invest in these rival companies if you see them doing really well, as well as trade and share stocks and bid for more rare or new items that come up. And some of these bidding wars, if your rivals lose, may lead to them unleashing some rather nefarious characters, such as the robber that tried to take over one of my trains. Now, from a control standpoint, they've done a decent job. Not only do you have touchscreen controls when using it in handheld mode, which is nice, and let's be honest, we've not seen that on every strategy title. They've gone for a sensible and simple layout for the controls in the main game using the Joy-Cons or Pro Controller. You'll rotate with the right stick, Move around with the left, selecting things with A and using your ZL and ZR to enter the build menu, which is sensibly designed with multi-layers, accessible by pressing the X button. It works really well, it's very simple, and the things you use the most are the ones that are right there when you jump into the menu. The game will constantly throw up new challenges for you to take on, and you'll find these green optional objectives pop up from time to time, which will give you a monetary reward. A campaign stage can take anywhere from an hour to 3, and in all honesty, I spent 6 hours in the first area and had an absolute blast. I lost 3 times, but when I started to get to grips with some of the more complex mechanics like the directional signals and maintaining the different trains, it's a really unexpectedly compelling title. Now, there are graphs for everything. If you are a graph nerd, you are going to love it. You can look at the statistics of individual engines, each town and what's profitable and not, and even how well you've managed to grow your company over time. Outside of the campaign modes, you have sandbox and free play mode, which are quite self-explanatory. I've played a lot of strategy on Switch. There have been a few titles which have annoyed me quite a bit, such as that mobile version of Roller Coaster Tycoon that came over. It's just rubbish. Why they didn't just bring us the classic original, I don't know, but it was lovely to have 2 Point Hospital show them how it was done. If you're in the market for a tycoon simulation title though, this is a great game and is incredibly fun, very deep, and it's got a lot of style to it as well. For me, I give gameplay 18 out of 20. While the controls, they're good, although the performance lets them down at times. I would give them 16 out of 20. Now, if the gameplay was the Moonlight Sonata, well, the visuals are a Shakespearean tragedy, and the performance is maybe an episode of Saved by the Bell. Now, in terms of the performance, the game is running, for the most part, at around 30 frames per second. And I say that because there are a number of stutters and drops and hitches. It's particularly evident when you transition between being really close to something and zooming all the way out. Now, it is impressive how far you can zoom out, and if you keep the camera in a fixed position, which you'll be doing for the most part in your gameplay, then you won't really notice anything. It will hover around 30, and for a strategy title, it's bearable. Resolution though is another matter. There's an option to ride along on the train, and I'm not gonna lie, I've seen more visually impressive mud cakes from my 6-year-old daughter. It looks at times just poor. Individual pixels take up about a quarter of the screen, and squint as I might, it's never going to look great. It's not all terrible. There are some impressive terrain manipulation tools available, and while I didn't feel the visuals hindered the gameplay, they certainly break a bit of the immersion when you go down close. Audio is quite the opposite. The voice actors of all the characters are really well handled.
And Norfolk. But you can do even more. Each city needs goods from the surrounding area. For example, every city needs corn.
And the smart delivery of individual video clips of tutorial that only pop up when you need them was a nice choice. These can be removed easily, and you can go back and actually sample each of those as and when you choose from the options menu. And I've got to say, it's got some of the best strategy game music I've ever heard. My son could not stop dancing to it. There's some real toe tappers in here without being repetitive and annoying. It's got some great music. The maps themselves, in terms of their accuracy, as far as my Year 5 geography can tell, are quite accurate and look good, with the models of the engines themselves being historically accurate, but unfortunately suffering from pixelitis. Overall for me, I would give the visuals a pretty mediocre 10 out of 20, saved mostly by the semi-decent performance, but the audio's excellent. That gets 18 out of 20. In terms of value, the game's going to set you back around about 35 quid, but this one can thankfully be found physically for a little bit cheaper. There's an incredible amount of content here, to be honest, with lots of scenarios, over 40 different engines, hundreds of technological unlocks, and potentially thousands of hours of play. It is a shame that the game doesn't look quite as nice as I would have liked, but if you're in the market for a very in-depth, but also very accessible console tycoon game, this is probably my favourite one on the Switch at the moment. But as is always the case, the issue we have is the fact that it's on other consoles and systems at a much reduced price. You can pick this up for around about 12 quid on your Xboxes, and in all honesty, as has been my mantra, if you have those systems, buy it there. However, if the Switch is your only place to buy, try and find the physical at a reduced price. Overall, I'd give value here 14 out of 20. So there we have it. I've really enjoyed my time with Railway Empire. Did not expect to be saying that, and Calypso Media have done a good enough job of bringing it over to the Switch. I would hope that maybe in a patch or two, those visuals can come up a touch. And when I say a touch, I mean like the biggest touch. The biggest touch ever. That sounds wrong. It scores a Switch Up score of 76%. Let us know down in the comments, are you going to forego Burnout and pick up Railway Empire? Do you know what? I don't think you'd be actually too disappointed if you got this one at all. Super addictive game, and that 76% is mainly down to the visuals and the higher price. A big thanks to the developers for the review copy, and to all of you who watch the channel. Thanks to our patrons who support us each and every month, and as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!